First of all, thank you all for coming very much. If Dad was here, he would really be moved by the amount of people that are here. So thank you. And also, my dad would definitely be pleased to see the amount of Hawaiian shirts throughout the whole place. So thank you all very much. For those who don't know, it was actually in Dad's will that if anyone showed up in a jacket and tie, that we were to cut off the tie and escort the person out. So luckily, we didn't have to do that. I know Becky was on standby as his goddaughter, ready to do that. Unfortunately, we didn't have any takers for that, so maybe next time. But again, thank you so much for coming. This is actually labeled a celebration, and it's actually very appropriate because my dad always felt like he won the lottery. Not in terms of money, but in terms of just his life. You know, when it was toward the end, you know, when all of us would sit with him at different times, you know, I was talking about, well, is there anybody we need to reach out to? Or, you know, do you have any people you need to talk to? Or, you know, things like that. And he was rather puzzled by my answer. He's like, I see everyone all the time. He's like, this is great. I feel like I won the lottery. I had a great life, moved out of my hometown. You know, I miss my sister, but I moved out of hometown, got to deploy overseas. Luckily didn't get killed there, and came on back, became an engineer, had 3 sons, and, you know, I'm not going to repeat the whole history, but he said, I felt like I won the lottery. You know, not everyone gets to have a really, you know, fulfilled life in that process. So no, I don't have any regrets. I don't need to reach out to people to close things out or things like that. So, so we had a good life. So I'm glad that we call this a celebration, because that's what it is. Um, so I know a lot of people are going to share different aspects of Dad's life, about his team building, about who he was, and associations. I want to talk about another side of him that maybe some didn't get a chance to see, and that was Dad was an engineer. Not just working for the phone company for 43 years, and very proud of it, but he was an engineer of life as well. What do I mean by that? He wanted to know how everything worked. Not just like how the car worked or how the electronics on a plane worked, but he wanted to know how it all worked. You know, when he found out that they were going to bulldoze Penasquitos Canyon, put a highway in there, he wanted to know, how did local politics work? How do we stop that? How do we make a difference in that way? He was very much an avid history buff too. He wanted to know everything about how politics, history worked. He got every single book that exists on biographies of the president, the first wives, Congress, and everything. He just wanted to know how things worked. He became an amateur astronomer, bought a bunch of telescopes, self-taught himself. There was a long-running program on the BBC that Sir Patrick Moore ran for many years, and he would watch that incessantly, trying to learn as much as he could about that. I say that for some of the young people in our audience. We didn't have Wikipedia, didn't have the internet. Your information came from, strangely enough, the television, and that's where a lot of good programs were out there. So Dad was an avid watcher of any science or science-based news programs that were out there. And I'll circle back to that amateur astronomy in a bit. One of the things that maybe a lot of people didn't know, I mean, I think they know where Dad reached out and talked to families and would want to know, you know, not just the kid coming into the troop, but who the family was, how they would get involved, but also a little bit about their background, what they did, and how it came to be. You know, they came to Mira Mesa, how they came to this part. He was very much interested in who and what they were. And so I know many people know about that part. The part they may not know is he loved talking about what we would call STEM now: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Whenever he got a chance, if there was a paper, if there was some new research that came out, Dad was knocking on my door and sharing me the next news and next discoveries that were being done either at AT&T or Bell Labs or any other place that went on. Just had an insatiable desire for that. I know some people in the room know that Dad was responsible for putting fiber optics running across the Coronado Bay Bridge to connect the island there. I think back then it was confidential information, but he would hint at me saying, look how they have cables going across the San Francisco Bay Bridge. You should keep an eye on Coronado the next time you drive over there. So, of course, you know, I was left as a teenager nebulous on what he meant by that, and then later proudly showed me the work that he had done on that part. And yeah, he became an avid fan of not only STEM, but STEM outreach. Any chance he would get, he would take the astronomy magazine or even popular science, and he would donate it to various local libraries because he wanted to make sure kids and other folks had access to things like that. Um, he also was also keen on learning different aspects about my brothers and I here. He knew that everyone had an interest, whether it was sports or science, would vigorously attend folks' games. But also when he knew that I was going to go in a different direction, he took me to a science conference. And at that science conference, got to meet Sir Patrick Moore, and he was like a kid in the candy store to meet this eminent scientist there. And of course, you know, Patrick Moore was very touched that an American had seen his program and came down to talk with us. And after 45 minutes, I kind of left the two of them talking there. I went back to go do something else, and he apparently spent hours there talking with him. He loved that opportunity. I had the chance to work with a couple other famous scientists, Dr. Sally Ride and Jerry Soffin in the Viking Project, and any chance he got to talk to them, he would spend hours doing that. And of course, I was always embarrassed thinking like, oh, what's he gonna say or do? And they're like, yeah, he's really, really good critical thinker. That's pretty impressive. And they said not all parents are like that. So thank you, Dad, for that aspect. And he was just delighted by that. He loved his time in the military. He wouldn't share too much about what he did in Vietnam till much later, but loved talking about the airplanes whenever he got a chance. I think by the time I was 6, I could identify everything that flew in the sky, because we always had practice on that. I think I learned how to identify planes before I identified birds. Yeah, it was great. It was an interesting having that. And I will jump ahead a little bit and talk about how much he loved not only family, but he loved his growing family. And so one of the things that Alex got married first, I got married second, and so next thing you know, he started having daughters, and he loved that aspect of having daughters. Never said daughters-in-law, always said daughters. Always corrected people when they try to tell him daughters-in-law. And then the other part, he loved having grandkids instantly. He loved having baby kids, but he loved having adult kids because, ta-da, it's project time. So my kids, even before Deborah and I got married, they learned to make rope, change tires on bicycles, and ride around the neighborhood. And of course, you know, parasailing and waterfall rappelling and doing all that type of fun stuff. So he loved having a growing family in the process. I've lost count of how many things that they would do. I would ask, how's it going out there? Oh, it's fine, we're busy, click. And I was like, okay, and I would learn from the kids later that they would play Mexican train dominoes, go to the Maritime Museum, go around sailing on boats. He just loved spending time with you guys, and I know he's very proud of both of you for that. Like I said, he wouldn't, when we were growing up, wouldn't really talk about his Vietnam deployments. And interesting enough, until grandkids came along. The first time I'm with Dad out on the USS Midway, he starts sharing all these stories with Greg. And I realized later that my grandfather started sharing his World War II stories with me and would never share it with his dad in the process. And it's one of those generational things that you sort of pick up later on. Once I joined the Navy and came back from Afghanistan, then Dad was able to open up at that time. And so we talked a lot about it and talked how much of a shock it was for him, you know, being in a war zone and then coming back to Main Street, USA, where people are having ice cream and, you know, having picnics in parks. And he asked, like for me, I said, oh, it took me 3 weeks to get back home. It was always these stages and unwinding and talking about it and sharing about it. And real strong emphasis on mental health. And I remember my dad many times talking about it. He's like, you're really lucky. He's like, unfortunately, my generation never appreciated mental health in what they probably should have done. He says, I think my dad suffered from PTSD, and he says, I might have suffered from some as well coming back, as well as many others. He's like, not to single myself out is what he would say, but he said, I'm glad to see that future generations are recognizing the importance of mental health that's out there. Had a doctor one time tell us when we were discussing mental health one time, and he said, you would never walk up to someone who is paralyzed and say, hey, it's all in your leg, get over it. He's like, but we say it's all in your head, get over it. And he said, it's a weird thing. You don't know how to fix your head except for going through trained professionals. And I know he's very proud of his granddaughter going to become a future mental health professional, and he was very proud of that toward the very end. But he would talk about how important that is, and told me how lucky I was in that process, and I know we talked about that a bit. He was very nervous at first when I told him I was going to join the Navy. I think at that time we had been attacked, global war on terrorism was going on, thought that we'd be all done fighting that. But when he realized that I had made this decision, I was going to go on, and he was very supportive of that, came to my promotion ceremonies, proudly would tell, and I think a number of you were at my last promotion ceremony, about how many relatives in the family were involved in that process, and was very supportive and would constantly want to know how things were going on. So it was a very unique and yet very touching experience for that. Just like I know for a lot of people, Noah would reach out and talk to you on an individual basis and kind of learn about what it was they were doing. Many times I would ask my parents how things are going, and as everyone knows, when you ask my mom a question, the very first phrase is, everything's fine, and then tell a little bit of details. Dad would tell a story like a sports by sports action on what that person was up to and what he was doing, and it was a very dynamic way to listen to the stories from that. So one of the things my dad is famous for, in Scouts they have what's called the Scoutmaster Minute. Not every troop does it, it's not required, but it was something he believed in. He believed in passing something on to the next generation. So what it is usually the leader gets up, he says, I'm gonna do my Scoutmaster Minute, which is sort of a joke because it never is a minute. It's always much longer than that. And then we give some advice. And many examples I can think of that he talked about: lead by example, family is everything, take care of each other, and the rest takes care of itself. Leave the place a better place than you found it. Keep on learning. If you fall, pick yourself back up, and be grateful, because you have one life and you should really enjoy it. Dad was certainly grateful for his life, his faith, his family, his friends, his community, and each of you. So thank you all for being here.